Good afternoon, everyone, and may I wish you a very warm welcome to the meeting of Eastleigh Borough Council, which is being broadcast and recorded via Microsoft Teams Live. My name is Councillor Cynthia Garton, and I am the Deputy Mayor of the Borough of Eastleigh. It is a formal meeting of the Council, and although we can't meet in person, there is on screen a picture of the mace, which I hope is sufficient. If any councillor experiences a connection problem, this event will be paused whilst they attempt to rejoin. In the unlikely event of myself losing a connection, then Councillor Janice Asman will take over. It is likely to be a very long meeting, which we will need to adjourn and restart tomorrow evening at 6 p.m. We have scheduled in breaks, but councillors are also reminded they are able to request a comfort break when required. It is very important that we ensure that every councillor is present when we restart the meeting, so a roll call will be taken after every break. The chat function must only be used by councillors to indicate they want to speak. It should not be used for questions, comments, or any other purposes. So now to move on to the purpose of this meeting. On Thursday the 25th and Friday the 26th of March, the Eastleigh Local Area Committee met to consider the planning application from Southampton International Airport. The committee expressed a wish to take a decision contrary to the recommendation of the Head of Housing and Development. As this application is of borough-wide significance, standing order Apologies, we are having a slight technical difficulty with the Deputy Mayor's microphone. We're with you back with you in a second.
I could hear every word perfectly from my end.
Are you able to hear me now? Okay. Oh. Right, apologies for that. Apologies for that, ladies and gentlemen. Right, so I will start again regarding the purpose of this meeting in case anyone missed that. Right, on Thursday the 25th and Friday the 26th of March, Eastleigh Local Area Committee met to consider the planning application from Southampton International Airport. The committee expressed a wish to take a decision contrary to the recommendation of the Head of Housing and Development. As the application is of borough-wide significance, Standing Order, Part 4, Appendix A, Paragraph 4(2) applies, and the decision-making responsibility now passes to the full Council. In accordance with Rule 2, small c, of the Council's Rules of Procedures, pages 4(2) of the Constitution, the Monitoring Officer requested that an extraordinary meeting of Eastleigh Borough Council be held to determine the Southampton Airport planning application. There will be no other business undertaken at this meeting. Questions have been asked about whether any councillor could be seen to have predetermined the application prior to this meeting, either by things they have said, or of course, in the case of the members of the local area committee, actually voted already on this application. To answer this concern, councillors are reminded that to take part in this meeting, you must have an open mind so that you can take all the relevant considerations presented to the meeting into account in reaching your decision. Paragraphs 4.5 of the Code of Conduct for dealing with planning matters on pages 5 to 25 of the Constitution, it states that where planning applications are to be considered by a successive committee or meeting, consideration will require the councillor to weigh up afresh all the reported material factors before reaching a decision at this meeting. Therefore, councillors, by attending today, you have decided that you will listen to all the points of view expressed by the speakers and public and are able to participate and cannot be seen to have predetermined this application. On the screen now is the approximate order of the meeting for today and tomorrow. We always welcome people to speak at the meeting, although this is a formal meeting of Eastleigh Borough Council and not a public meeting. Public participation during this virtual meeting will be undertaken in a slightly different way. The members of the public that have registered to speak will be invited into the live event and will be given a total of 3 minutes to speak. With many people wanting to speak, I am going to be very strict on the time allowed. A verbal 30-second advance warning will be provided by the Chief Executive. If a speaker continues beyond the 3 minutes, I have instructed the Chief Executive to mute the microphone and we will move on to the next speaker. I do apologise in advance if this becomes necessary, but I hope that all will respect this reasonable and fair request. There will be the opportunity prior to the full debate for councillors to seek clarification and to ask questions of the Head of Housing and Development, Andy Granfield. Councillors will not be limited on the number of questions they can ask, although they need to be relevant and avoid repetition and not have been already dealt with in the report. As the chair of the meeting, I do have the discretion to curtail questions if I believe they are not relevant or they are being asked to simply frustrate and extend the debate. So therefore, councillors, I'm going to ask Laura to do a roll call, please. Laura, if you can, thank you.
Thank you, Chair. Councillor Airy.
I'm present.
Councillor Allingham.
Present.
Councillor Asman.
Present.
Councillor Atkinson.
Present.
Councillor Bearder.
Present.
Councillor Bicknell.
Present.
Councillor Bourne.
Present.
Councillor Broadhurst.
Present.
Councillor Campbell.
Present.
Councillor Clark.
Present.
Councillor Corbin.
Present.
Councillor Caldry.
Present.
Councillor Craig.
Present.
Councillor Cross.
Present.
Councillor Dean.
Present.
Councillor Doogie.
Present.
Councillor Dogood.
Present.
Councillor Garton.
Present.
Councillor Gomer.
Present.
Councillor Grajewski.
Present.
Councillor Groves.
Present.
Councillor Holes.
Present.
Councillor House.
Present.
Councillor Irish,
Present.
Councillor Jerd,
Present.
Councillor Curl,
Present.
Councillor Mann,
Present.
Councillor Manning,
Present.
Councillor Marsh,
Present.
Councillor Parker Jones,
Present.
Councillor Pragnall,
Present.
Councillor Pretty,
Present.
Councillor Rich,
Present.
Councillor Tennant,
Present.
Councillor Tidridge,
Present.
Councillor Trace,
Here.
and finally Councillor Tyson Payne.
Present.
Thank you very much. Back to you, Chair.
Thank you very much, Laura, and thank you, councillors. So we will now move to the first agenda item, which is apologies, and our Chief Executive, Nick Tustian, will now read those. Any apologies we have, Nick, please.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Mayor. We have one apology, and that's from Councillor Rushton.
Thank you very much, Nick. Are there any other apologies for absence, please, councillors? No? OK. In that case, then, we will move on to item 2, which is declarations of interest. Declarations of interest have been circulated in advance of this meeting. Do members have any additional declarations of interest they wish to make? If so, please indicate now, and when called, please state the nature and reason for the interest. You can, of course, declare any interest as they occur to you in the meeting. Okay. I don't think we have any more. Right, thank you very much. Right, item 3 then. An emergency motion was lodged as soon as this extraordinary council meeting was called. Can I ask Councillor Tidridge to propose the motion, please? And you are reminded, Councillor Tidridge, that you have 10 minutes to introduce your motion. When seconded, or if it's seconded, all councillors will have 5 minutes each to speak. And at the end of the debate, Councillor Tidridge will have 5 minutes to sum up before we take a recorded vote. Councillor Tidridge, please. Thank you.
Thank you. Am I live yet? Yes, I'm live. Thank you, Mayor. I'm proposing that this council defers considering the application to extend Southampton Airport's runway. Whether the application is approved or rejected, legal challenges are likely.
Apologies, Councillor Tidridge. We are having a technical issue with our website, which means people can't access the links to the web meeting currently. If they've already got the link, it's working, but if they haven't and they're trying to get on now, it's not working. So if we could just take a brief pause while we get this resolved, and we will be back with you shortly.
No problem.
Apologies, Councillor Tidridge, you can proceed.
Thank you. I'm proposing that this council defers considering the application to extend Southampton Airport's runway. Whether the application is approved or rejected, legal challenges are likely. The airport may appeal if it is rejected. The emergence of organisations like Client Earth now make judicial review or other legal action more likely if it is passed. Until the 23rd of March, just 16 days ago, I was unaware that there was any likelihood that full council would determine this application, and I don't think I was alone. Indeed, members may recall that last July, Councillor Lou Parker-Jones proposed, and I seconded, a motion suggesting that planning decisions of this importance be determined by full council. Our proposal was roundly rejected, with many members stating why it was so important that the local area committees take this type of decision. My first concern is that because this meeting is taking place just 13 days after the ELAC committee voted to reject the application, not enough time has passed for members to reset their views. Based on the strong opposition expressed last year for Councillor Parker-Jones's motion, I worry that members may feel obliged to simply ratify the LAC's decision rather than assess it fully as a planning application. Members have been sent guidelines to check through to ensure that we are not predetermined, a really sensible action. Although I spoke against the application on the 25th, I passed these guidelines. Although Councillor House spoke for the application on the 25th, I'm sure that he passes these guidelines. I am also sure that all ELAC members passed these guidelines, however they voted on the 26th, but only 13 days have elapsed since that meeting. Although the letter of the law may have been applied, it is really important to all of us, our residents and all stakeholders, that we are not simply ticking boxes, but that we have really reset and that our minds are open. I'm sure that since the 26th, all members have been working as hard as we can to prepare for today's meeting. We've read reports in full, we've watched the 15 hours of video footage of the meeting, but we have not had the full technical briefings that the council felt that the ELAC members needed to prepare for the 25th of March. We have not had the opportunity to be as well prepared as the ELAC members. If it was felt that the ELAC members needed 4 technical briefings, then all members should be given 4 technical briefings before assessing this application. I was informed on the 3rd of April, 5 days ago, that instead I could send queries to Andy Granfield before today's meeting, which I've done, and Andy has been amazingly helpful. But that requires me to know what to ask, and I am a layperson, not a planning officer, not an expert on airports. A briefing is different in that it is set by experts designed to bring lay people's knowledge upwards, covering issues that might not be aware that they do not know, the unknown unknowns. That's very different to being advised to pass questions to an expert. And expecting officers to answer a large number of queries from councillors before the meeting has been, in my opinion, unreasonable to officers. I've asked many, I'm sure you all have. I'd be surprised if officers have been able to respond fully to all given the 2.5 working day window allowed. The pressure to work over the holiday weekend must have been immense. ELAC members have been able to submit questions over months regarding the airport. And we have been informed that we will not have the opportunity to question speakers today in the same way that the ELAC members could in ELAC meeting. Not being able to question all these speakers and delve into the issues they raise mean that we will not be able to examine the application in the same way. Instead, the draft schedule gives us 1 hour for the 38 members to ask questions in Friday's session. So that's less than 2 minutes per member, including answers that are unlikely to be short due to the technical nature of this application. Arguably, we will inevitably be less thorough, simply because of this change to the meeting format. Another issue with the meeting format is that we have not started until 2 p.m. today. Excluding breaks, the indicative timetable allows 15 hours for this meeting over 2 sessions with 38 members. For the ELAC meeting with 8 members, 16.5 hours. Surely with more members, more time should be allocated, especially for debate. A minimum of 190 minutes should have been allocated for debate, even if there are no amendments. Again, we need to question if we have the opportunity to be thorough. It has been pointed out by a member that a more appropriate timetable would have been to follow the model for the planning inspectorate inquiries, 10 a.m. to 5 p.m. The member also stated that members' abilities to concentrate may well decline after 9 p.m, and that it is, I quote, plain rude, to expect the applicant to be presenting at 11:30 p.m. tonight. If we defer and reschedule, then a more appropriate timetable can be drawn up. And finally, there are critical matters missing from the report that are material. Just one example, section 545. With regards to construction noise, a detailed construction noise assessment has not yet been carried out. But it is not uncommon to expect a draft detailed assessment to be done for a big infrastructure project, ready for the planning decision meeting, even if a contractor has not yet been appointed. We do not have a draft construction environmental management plan with a construction noise assessment. The report states that noise can be so severe that local residents may need to be temporarily rehomed, so I feel that this is a serious omission. That's just one example. The airport opted to delay the application assessment from December. By deferring for just a few more weeks, they may be able to further improve their submission, addressing the concerns expressed at the ELAP meeting. So to allow members of the council to take this decision properly trained, properly open-minded, with all critical aspects of the application properly prepared, I propose deferring. Given that there are Borough Council elections on the 6th of May, when new members may be elected, I propose that the new date is no earlier than the 12th of July, and more time should be scheduled than we have today and tomorrow. I'm also sure that although the meeting will not be virtual, it can still be broadcast with options given to the public to speak remotely. Yesterday, we learned that a proposal to redevelop Leeds Bradford Airport has been delayed to allow Community Secretary Robert Jenrick more time to consider it. This sets precedent, so that deciding to defer it now is not kicking the can down the road, but ensuring that the decision is taken responsibly. I do want to recognise the incredibly hard work done by this council's officers to prepare for this meeting. I know long hours have been worked over the Easter holiday weekend. To get us to this point is really impressive, but to me, this all feels rushed. And to rush this important decision is unseemly, is inappropriate, and does not reflect well. Please consider voting to defer to a later date. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Councillor Tidridge. Do I have a seconder for that motion, please?
Hello, Mayor. It's Councillor Parker-Jones, and I will be seconding Councillor Tidridge's proposal, a motion rather, and if it's still appropriate, I shall reserve my right to reply later. Is that all right?
That's absolutely fine. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Councillor Parker-Jones. Right, we will now move into debate. And I do have speakers already, councillors already have indicated they wish to speak. Can we go to Councillor Tim Groves, please?
Thank you, Madam Deputy Mayor. I think what I'd like to say is the reports have been available for a long time and all councillors have had them for a while. We've all had the opportunity to read them, to seek clarification and ask questions. There are many people lined up to speak at today's meeting who've taken time off to be able to contribute both last week and this. I'd just like to say in 1 month's time, I think a meeting will be pretty much impossible. The government have told councils that the legislation for online decision making will lapse on the 7th of May, and they have no intention of extending the legislation to allow online meetings. This makes no sense to me, but that's what the government have told councils. Therefore, we would need to have an in-person meeting with 39 councillors, some of them completely new, who wouldn't have any background at all, present, and officers supporting. And then, if open to the public, maybe 100 people wanting to attend to make their representations. It's totally impracticable. There's not a hall big enough. Perhaps we could hire the AGS Bowl, have an outdoor meeting outside on the cricket pitch, or hire centre court in Wimbledon if it's likely to rain and they're not playing tennis. Businesses need to know where they stand. We all need to know where we stand. Businesses have decisions to make. It's going to be a difficult decision for the business of Southampton Airport whether or not this planning application is approved. Lots of other businesses rely on the airport locally to supply and service it and for their own business operations. Uncertainty is the last thing they want. The way the UK has handled Brexit was really bad, leading to uncertainty. We don't want that for Southampton and our airport. We need to make a decision on what is, after all, a very limited runway extension. It's not a new third runway at Heathrow or a new second runway at Gatwick, whichever way the decision goes. All of us need certainty on this either way so we can move forward. The airport and local businesses rely on it, and it's all to do with recovering after COVID. That's got to be our priority going forward. And as well as that, the climate emergency, we need to address that. Those are the two really important issues we need to focus on to go forward and plan for recovery. We need to make a decision now on both these issues and any others relating to the planning. Deferral is not the answer. Thank you, Madam Deputy Mayor.
Thank you very much, Councillor Groves. The next speaker we have is Councillor Tim Bearder. Councillor Bearder.
Thank you, Deputy Chair. I'm aware that the reports were available, have been for a long time, but councillors like myself who believed up until a week before ELAC was that it was going to be decided by ELAC. So I didn't read the reports, and neither did I turn up to any of the briefings and presentations that were given to them over the 2-year period. So I have had 10 days, as Councillor Tidridge said, 2.5 working days over a busy bank holiday weekend to bring myself up to speed. We've even had a briefing this morning in advance of today's meeting that there will be some updates to the council's full council's recommendation. That came at 1:30 today. The argument that we can't do it virtually, well, I don't think we should be rushing decisions because of the mechanisms of doing council meetings. I'm sure there is capacity for us councillors to meet if that's what the government insanely insist, and take contributions virtually on a television screen into the full council meeting. There are many ways, as we proved with our resilience and our capability to adapt over the pandemic, that we can do this with a combination of a hybrid virtually and physically, if that is indeed what is required. And Tim Groves, Councillor Groves, whilst I respect what he's saying, I'm not sure Brexit is a great analogy. He said that the indecision meant that we all suffered. That I think I'm not sure whether we wanted to race Brexit through. I mean, whether Brexit would have been done better if it had been done quicker. I think what happened with Brexit is it was handled badly because it was raced through. Theresa May tried for a long time to get something over the line that couldn't be agreed in Parliament, and then it was rushed at the last minute by Boris Johnson, who lied to us and said that there would be no border down the Irish Sea, and there clearly is. So things come a cropper when you race decisions like this. I think, given the context with the Secretary of State deferring his decision on Lee Bradford Airport, the fact that the 6th climate budget is going to be adopted, or the government are going to make a decision on that in June, and that's hanging over us. There's so much that manifestly have bearing on this decision, and the councillors cannot have got themselves up to speed in the way that the ELAC members had been, that I believe that this decision does need to be deferred. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Councillor Bearder. The next person I have who wishes to speak is Councillor Alex Bourne. Councillor Bourne, please.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Chair. Having had to sit through this whole meeting at ELAC for many hours, I can let members know that you cannot be experts in all of these things. We're not councillors to be experts in all things. We have to use officer advice and knowledge because they become the experts, and you know, we had an awful lot of reading to do. So I was pleased that everybody had the report before the ELAC meeting, so we've all had the same opportunity to read the report. And I would like to say that if people feel that they don't have enough information or haven't read the report, then maybe they shouldn't be part of this meeting if they haven't had a chance to read it all. But I think we need to make the decision now. It's been going round and round. We have all the evidence at our fingertips, and we should be using that now to make a decision. Thank you, Madam Deputy Chair.
Thank you very much, Councillor Bourne. I will now move to Councillor Alan Broadhurst, please. Councillor Broadhurst.
Thank you. For a start, I think if whatever we decide today, the decision will invariably be taken further, as has already been said. And if it does have to go to the Secretary of State, I think it's duty bound on us to make a decision which at least would let him know the views of the local council. And I think that is important. Now, as far as delaying this to a future date and possibly a future meeting, which was most likely have to be an actual meeting. Experience at things like local plan meetings, where the public being there really did get very wound up and strong feelings on both sides, and I just don't think it would be fair to our officers, because we'd have to find a venue. About the only thing I disagree with Councillor Groves is that the venue would probably have to be prepared to accept about 1,000 people. It would certainly have to be big, because it's a lot of interest, and we would need loads of staff there. We would probably perhaps need the police there, because we've all seen views lately where people are protesting and they get completely carried away, forget all about social distancing, and I think a virtual meeting is by far the better way forward, where it keeps the atmosphere a lot cooler, a lot calmer, where we can actually debate things civilly, which I think is much better, rather than having a load of public, which happened at the local plan hearings, really trying to intimidate councillors, members and members of staff. I think it'd be better for the staff, and it'd be better for the applicants if we get on and decide this as soon as possible. We've got the information we need, we've got advice from our professional officers. I think we just need now to listen to all the evidence, to weigh that up in line with our officers' recommendations, and make our decision as soon as possible. Then at least everyone knows and can move on, whether they're for or against. And I'm talking here about the public and the applicants. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Councillor Broadhurst. We will now move to Councillor Irish. Councillor Irish, please.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Mayor. Well, I've been on this council for 39 years. I'm the longest serving member of this council, as you know, and I've been on planning all that time. And I don't think I've ever had to deal with a planning application as complicated and as important as this. Now, I had the privilege of being an ELAC member, of having lots of information over I think the last couple of years. I believe we had 4 technical briefings and all sorts of things, and we've had all this time to consider all the facts and come to a decision on the 25th of March or 26th of March, which we did. But I do feel it's not particularly good for other members of the council who haven't had the privilege of all this information, who haven't had all the technical briefings, to try and push something through in a few days that is so important. And Madam Deputy Mayor, I was under the impression that council officers wanted us to have this meeting today, but having seen the email this morning from the Chief Executive, which I think we've all seen, apparently it's the administration that has done that, so we can't blame the officers, can we? But I do think we ought to support the motion, defer it. It needs more careful consideration and needs to be dealt with later. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Councillor Irish. We will now move to Councillor Daniel Clark. Councillor Clark, please.
Thank you, Chair. I totally agree with the deferral. The confidence amongst the public that this has been decided fairly and transparently is of paramount importance to me. The side who are happy with whatever outcome occurs from this meeting may be delighted, but I think it's going to be very difficult for us to convincingly say to everyone that we've been fair to all sides in a believable way if this meeting were to proceed and a decision were taken tomorrow night. To start with, you can see a lot of the public debate which feels that this process has been murky up to this point. So there were a lot of questions about why this should go to ELAC rather than full council in the first place, and the council took a very firm view that that was to be in line with the council's commitment to localism, and any arguments that it should go to full council were dismissed quite firmly until about a few days before the ELAC meeting, where it then came out that unless ELAC effectively were a rubber stamp for the planning officer's recommendation, it would indeed be going to full council. So that seems very strange to members of the public, and I don't think they've really had time to digest why that sudden turnaround happened. And I think to decide this very quickly before the public have had a chance to scrutinise that will damage public confidence in this council. That this matter did not come to full council in the first place is it could be argued what has held this decision up, and I do take on board the logic of people who say that this matter needs to be concluded in a timely fashion, but this can still be concluded in a reasonable time with a reasonable deferral. I think that not deferring it and forcing this through crash bang wallop will create a number of other problems. And as we've said, you know, there will be a legal challenge. I'm sure, you know, everyone seems to think that that is the, you know, likely to happen. And I think that by forcing this through this quickly, we will be creating a lot of issues for the council in that legal challenge. For example, one of the things which I think people have questions about is this whole issue of predetermination. Now, the advice is that everyone's approaching this with an open mind, and I don't question that for anybody. All of us are here approaching it with an open mind. The question is, do the public really believe that? And I've seen lots of comments from the public that regard that as an insult to their intelligence because of the number of councillors who have either voted one way or the other on this application at ELAC or parish councils, or who have been very vocal publicly about this. So many members of the public feel it's a bit of an insult to their intelligence that you know, councillors are coming here with an open mind, even though I certainly don't dispute that myself. And to some extent, the council has conceded there's an issue here because the mayor usually chairs the full council. The mayor is not chairing this meeting because he was a member of ELAC. He made a decision, he voted in ELAC. He's still taking part today, but he's not chairing. The chair is the deputy mayor, who's an extremely good councillor, but the chair of this meeting was going to make a public statement in support of the airport, but that was withdrawn at the ELAC meeting to allow the chair to chair today. So that does, as far as the public's concerned, say to the public, well, actually, there must be an issue here about whether predetermination is not occurring with this meeting taking place so soon after so many councillors have stated their views. So there's a damage to the public confidence, which I think could happen, which would be totally irreversible and cause problems for this council on lots of other issues. OK, I think another issue is the inconsistency over being well informed, because whilst ELAC were considering this matter, it was considered by the leadership very important that briefings were attended, that all technical briefings were attended, or if, you know, councillors couldn't attend, OK, they couldn't attend, that they would watch the recordings and answer the questions. There is an email from one of the leadership on EBC to ELAC members on 9th of January 2020, over a year ago, stressing the importance of these briefings. Now, it is a different story. The leadership is saying that it's not important for councillors to attend these briefings. So that inconsistency is really questionable. And I know I don't have much time left, but there have not been strong, compelling reasons for holding this meeting today. And the email exchanges today amongst senior councillors and the chief executive do question whether this meeting has to happen today. I would ask questions about what the legal, I have heard that there was legal advice to say. OK.
Thank you very much, Councillor Clark. I think we need to move on. Thank you. And may I just say, you've just mentioned about chairing of this meeting. Yes, I am the deputy mayor and I am also a councillor, and I come to this as an impartial chair, although I obviously, as you mentioned, I did intend to speak, but as with other councillors coming to this meeting, I have an open mind and I am chairing this impartially. Thank you very much, Councillor Clark. Right, we will now move on to Councillor Grajewski. Councillor Grajewski, please.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Mayor. I think there's a public expectation that we make this decision today and not kick the can further down the road. We've all had the opportunity to ask questions since the application was submitted and the opportunity to read the documents. We all had the opportunity to watch the meeting at ELAC, and I know I watched every at times painful minute of it, particularly towards the end. It was a very, very long meeting, but I sat through it. You know, I think one of the problems with the local area committee system, and you know, many of you know that I'm not in favour of it, but I think people tend to perhaps feel that they're parochial ward councillors, and I think we need to remember that we are borough councillors and we all have a duty to all of the residents of the borough. So, you know, I don't think that there's an excuse of well, we don't know enough. We've had a duty to make it our business to know about something that affects the whole of the borough and beyond. As to whether people are open-minded or predetermined, yes, it's only a few days since the last meeting, but you know, I've gone to planning meetings sometimes, having read the papers, thinking I'm probably going to vote one way. And then because of something I hear at that meeting, I've actually changed my mind at the meeting. So, you know, people, so long as they are coming to this open-minded, as I am, then I think there's no reason why we shouldn't make the decision today. Somebody mentioned the Leeds Bradford Airport one, which has been, the decision's not coming this week now from the Secretary of State. Well, at least the local planning authority did determine the application, and we need to determine that application today. And I've been trying to find it, but somewhere in the report that we've got, the officers do talk about reasons why we should not defer this application, and I'm afraid I've got so much pink highlighter over my agenda I can't find it, but I wonder, Madam Chairman, if it would be possible for the officers to direct us to that part of the report, because I think we should be taking their advice. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Councillor Grajewski. Our next speaker is Councillor Dean. Councillor Dean, please.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Mayor. First of all, I'm very upset with Councillor Bourne's comments. As a person who is quite severely dyslexic, and I have problems with reading, going through a 240-page document, plus reading all the other stuff, I actually work for a living as well. So I've had very little time to get through all this. This document came through to me last week. I've only had a few days to read it. I will actually say I haven't got all the way through it. So according to Alex Bourne, I should drop out of this meeting immediately because I haven't bothered to read all the documentation. I'm really offended by that. Secondly, Councillor Broadhurst's comment, oh, well, we're doing this now so we don't have all the public. If we are genuinely frightened of the public turning up to a meeting, we're doing this to hide ourselves from the public. That is not the attitude we're supposed to be doing. We're supposed to represent the public and listen to their comments. So I personally believe this should be deferred. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Councillor Dean. We'll now move to Councillor Bicknell. Councillor Bicknell, please.
Thank you, Deputy Madam Chair. Number of points I'd like to pick up on. It doesn't happen very often, but I actually agree with Councillor Grajewski on the majority of what she said, that this actually does need determining. But there's just a couple of points I wanted to actually pick up on beforehand, and that's that I don't agree at all that the public will have a lack of confidence in us today in determining this application. The public will have a lack of confidence on us if we run away from making a decision today and deferring it further down the road. Because my inbox, I've had 485 emails from residents expressing their views for and against, and 100% of them want a decision. I haven't had one single email that has asked for a deferral. So we have a duty to the public to actually, you know, we have 155 attendees watching at the moment. We have a duty to the public to actually make a decision, because we are councillors that are elected to make decisions. And we're not forcing this through, because at the end of the day, we will all get the opportunity to vote later on tomorrow after we've heard all the evidence, because this, after all, is a planning application based on evidence in a planning report. And as has been stated, we actually we don't need to be experts, because actually we're not experts in planning at all. We never determine a planning application, whether it be a house extension, an airport, or a new block of flats, as experts in building and etc. etc. We look at the evidence in the report that we're given by the professionals. Now, there's much that's been said about the amount of time that ELAC had to prepare over full council. ELAC had their report at exactly the same time as all members have had, you know, the report that we're looking at today. We didn't actually have sight of that report any earlier, 10 days beforehand, to go through at that stage 238 pages. That's all the time we've had. So ELAC had exactly the same amount of time as we all have at this new report. There's been mention about the technical briefs we've had. The technical briefs, I would say, were useful, and I'm not being disrespectful for the staff that gave up their time, but actually I would not say they were essential for reading and understanding the report. Much of that credit goes to Andy Granfield and the way he has written his planning report. Not all ELAC councillors attended all of the technical briefs, and much of the technical briefs were actually about debating and talking about other things that actually weren't in the technical brief. So whilst ELAC had the technical briefs and they were useful, they were not essential, because I missed one, and as I say, it made no difference to me reading the report, but that's credit to the way Andy Granfield has written his report. So public, you know, 100% of the public wanted a decision. It's been mentioned about the 6th carbon budget as another reason why we should defer. It's a smoke screen and a red herring to actually not make a decision today, because whatever happens with the 6th carbon budget, it will still affect, or possibly affects, Southampton International Airport, whether they have the extension or not. So the 6th carbon budget and delay until after then is just a smokescreen and a red herring. Any restrictions on Southampton International Airport as a result of that will happen regardless of today's decision. Leeds and Bradford is not our application. It's irrelevant to this planning application. It's irrelevant to the deferral. As Councillor Borewski said, at least Leeds and Bradford actually made a decision and didn't kick the can down the road. And as well as the public, who have given up a huge amount of time in emailing us and tuning into today's meeting and tomorrow's meeting, there is also the staff. I do disagree with the notion of holding this meeting in real time and having to do it virtually because it's the only way it will work. But that's not the point.
30 seconds, Councillor.
Thank you. We are determining today. And much has been done, you know, much has been said about the way that the format of the meeting. Well, actually, some of us work. To have a 10 till 5 meeting over 2 days, you know, we have to take holiday. There are a number of us that work during the day that have taken holiday for today, and there are some of us that have actually had to take a day's unpaid because we couldn't get holiday. So we actually have to be flexible on our actual timings. So that's all I want to say. So thank you very much, Madam Deputy Mayor.
Thank you very much, Councillor Bicknell. And before we move on to our next speaker, Councillor Grajewski mentioned a part of the report where it refers to reasons for not deferring the meeting. So while we carry on with the rest of the debate, I'm going to ask Andy Granfield if you could just come in, Andy, please, and just direct members to where that is in the report, please. Thank you, Andy.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, it's referenced a couple of places in the report, and we did actually take legal advice on this matter, particularly with regards to the legislation changes that are likely to come forward later in the year. Paragraph 880 references it, and also it's the penultimate paragraph, which I think is 969, set out in there that the reasons why it's not necessary to defer this from a prematurity perspective. Thank you. Was there anything else you wanted clarification on, Chair, on deferral?
I think that's absolutely fine. Thank you very much. And that's really useful, Andy. Thank you. Right, so we will continue the debate with Councillor Ian Corbin, please. Councillor Corbin.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Mayor. listening to colleagues and being so far down the speaker list, there are a few things which I try not to repeat. I've listened to everybody else. I can't say that I agree with many of the points raised by those people agreeing to the motion. I will not be voting to defer this decision today. Colleagues have had time to prepare and to have also considered the previous representations to the ELAC meeting on the 25th of March, and indeed the decision on the 26th. Indeed, many of us actually followed live on the day, as has already been said. Many members of the public have written to us as well over the last couple of weeks or so, and I know many are prepared to speak today, both in favour and against the matter which we're going to determine. Whatever the outcome, I believe those residents, participants and the applicant have an expectation that this will be concluded, and that is what I think we should do. Councillor Bicknell has just mentioned this point of the many correspondence emails that I've received. To the best of my knowledge, not one has suggested a deferral, and I do think viewers today will potentially be scratching their heads that this motion has been raised. I don't agree that the public generally think that this is something that we should be kicking down the road. I'll not be supporting this motion to defer. Thank you, Madam Deputy Mayor.
Thank you very much, Councillor Corbin. We will now move to Councillor Margaret Atkinson. Councillor Atkinson, please.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Mayor. I think, if I may, Madam Deputy Mayor, I would like to quote you when you started this meeting. It is councillors' decision-making responsibility, and that is what we're doing at this meeting. It is our responsibility to take a decision on the planning application that has been put before us. And I think we'd be shirking that responsibility if we try to defer it for whatever reason. I think too, it would be disrespectful to our officers who have given us specific advice, particularly on the deferment issue, which has been mentioned by Mr. Granfield. Disrespectful too to our residents. They are expecting us to make a decision today. And where are we as their councillors if we just, as somebody's quite politely put it, kick it down the road? The applicant needs a decision. Planning for business is not easy, and the airport in particular has had its difficulties over this last year, not least of all because of Flybe and COVID, and it now wants a decision so it can go forward and hopefully prosper. So it is difficult to see why we should be deferring a decision, and therefore, Madam Deputy Mayor, I will not be supporting the proposal to defer. Thank you.
Chair, you're on mute. I can't hear a word.
Sorry, I beg your pardon. Thank you very much, Councillor Craig. Right, as I was saying, sorry, this is all quite tense and stressful at the moment, to be perfectly honest. Right, so I have 3 councillors who have already indicated to speak, and I think at the end of that we will then go back to Councillor Parker Jones, who has reserved the right to speak as the seconder. So Councillor Tonya Craig, please. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair, and sorry for interrupting, but I didn't know whether you were asking me to come in or not. I totally agree with what Judith has said as well. We do need to make a decision. We are borough councillors. We've nearly taken an hour already on this debate, which wasn't put on the business. This is not what we're here for. We're here for a planning application. So I really wanted to come in and say I agreed with lots of things that have already been said, and should we not just be going to the vote on this motion? You know, we have got members of the public that have taken time off. We've got councillors that have taken time off to be here to make a decision today. So I would really like to be going to that vote. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much, Councillor Craig. As I said, I've got 2 more speakers, and then we will go back to Councillor Parker Jones just to sum up. Anyone else who has indicated since Councillor Holes indicated we will not be inviting them to speak at this time. Thank you. I will now go to Councillor Pragnell, please.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Mayor. You'll be pleased to know that Councillor Corbin, Bicknell and Craig have just said everything I was going to say. So I'll bid you a good day and we will carry on with the motion. Sorry to waste your time.
Councillor Pragnell, you haven't wasted my time at all. Thank you. Right, our last speaker now before we go back to Councillor Parker-Jones is Councillor Holes. Thank you, Councillor Holes.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. I just want to be fairly brief if I can be. I listened to the reports on Leeds Bradford and it became apparently clear very quickly that that was a much larger application looking to build a new terminal and extend passenger numbers up to, I believe, somewhere in the region of 7 million. The Secretary of State has called it in, or he's put a delay on it. We all know about the government having to make decisions on the net zero policy, etc., and the SIP carbon budget later in the year or the beginning of next year. I think if we make a decision today or tomorrow, then that will then give the Secretary of State a chance to decide whether he wants to do the same to our application. And it will also give a number of other airports around the country that are also looking at planning applications, an idea of where they stand. So I think we should go ahead with it. I agree with a lot of what has been said, and really that's all I wanted to say at this point. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Councillor Holes. And as I indicated, you will be the last speaker in the debate, but we will now return to Councillor Parker-Jones, who seconded the motion and reserved her right to speak. Councillor Parker-Jones.
Thank you, Deputy Mayor. I just wanted to ask, because I believe Councillor Campbell wanted to ask something. Could I ask why she's not been invited to speak?
I think what happened, I'd already said that we had 3 more councillors who wished to speak, and then I was going to come to you for that, for you to as you've reserved your right to speak as the last speaker, and she came in after that. So that's the reason why, Councillor Parker-Jones.
Sorry, I thought that she had put her name up so I could see it on my screen. Okay, thank you. So some people are saying that by doing this that we're not taking a decision, but actually to delay is also making a decision to give all members the opportunity to be briefed properly, fully, and to be cited on absolutely everything. There is a lot of technical information. There are a lot of reports that are referred to within the document, and you click on those links and they don't automatically come up. You've got to go and find it. It has taken a lot of people's time up. There's a lot of information that, because we were informed we would not be taking that decision, members didn't look at. And quite understandably, we weren't supposed to be being part of the decision-making process, and suddenly we have found ourselves in that position. This isn't the same as an extension to a house. This is a huge infrastructure project, and it deserves absolutely the right amount of time to ensure all members are comfortable with the process and are cited effectively on all the information. There are so many technical questions that I do have. I haven't sent them all in because I feel that the public also need to be aware of those questions so that they can hear the answers. I do think that this meeting potentially is open to legal challenge. And I feel that just saying because it's a decision to delay rather than to make a decision for or against is not a decision. It is absolutely a decision. The people have commented about Leeds. Well, actually, that is hugely important. The reason Leeds has been delayed is because of the 6th carbon targets, which are due to be set in June. So there is absolutely, I don't understand why we've waited 2 years and then need to rush something in within like 10 days of a previous decision. because I think this throws into question all the decisions this council makes if it feels that we can overturn decisions so quickly, unfettered and unrestricted. I think that, you know, not only this decision, but many other decisions this council has taken should be questioned at that point if we feel that people can change their mind almost the very next day. I don't think that we should say we do not want to hold it later because we do not want members of the public present. I think that's absolutely outrageous. There is most certainly a lack of transparency if you do not want your members of the public to be able to turn up and witness democracy, no more than having members of the public talk here now. So I don't think that's a reason that we should go ahead just because we're holding it online. I do understand I'm very, very nervous about coming out of the pandemic and us having to meet in public. Massive reservations, but that is not a reason in and of itself for us to say we can't defer this decision. I think Councillor Tidridge set out very well our concerns. I did raise this before, that I thought it should be something that came to the full council, and I was resoundingly knocked down and told no. And I accepted that, absolutely. The council decided that it was for the decision of ELAC, and ELAC made a decision, and now we're suddenly saying because they made a decision that was against the housing officers, we're going to look at it again. I do have huge concerns. I would like to think that people would put this and give it the just length of time that it deserves to be debated properly. Yeah, so I will be supporting the motion to have this deferred. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Councillor Parker-Jones. Before we move to Councillor Tidridge to sum up, Councillor Doogie is raising a point of order. So I'm going to ask our legal officer, Ian Austin. We'll move to Ian Austin, please. Thank you.
Thank you. The position with a point of order is that a member may speak in personal explanation, but such an explanation shall be confined to some material part of a former speech by the member at the same meeting which may have been misunderstood. And the ruling of the Mayor on the admissibility of a point of order shall be final. Councillor Doogie has not yet spoken, so under the Constitution is not yet entitled to make a point of order. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ian. In that case, then we will move to Councillor Jin Tidridge to sum up, please. You have 5 minutes, Councillor Tidridge.
Thank you, Deputy Mayor. Can you hear me okay? You can, great. Just referring back to a point made by Councillor Bicknell, I've literally just received an email from a member of the public stating that they didn't realise that deferral was an option. If they did, they would have sent us an email earlier to request deferral. I agree, it is completely inappropriate to use COVID-19 and a dislike of vocal public participation as a reason not to defer this meeting. I am so pleased that this council is now able to broadcast meetings and that virtual public participation is possible thanks to technology. Although council meetings will be going back to non-virtual formats after 6th of May, a decision I have massive, grave misgivings about, I'm sure that officers will be able to continue broadcasting and give the public the option of speaking remotely so that they come up on a screen. Before I was elected as a councillor, I attended long council meetings as an interested member of the public, and I can assure members that I would have much preferred to have done so virtually from the comfort of my home. Neither of the paragraphs referencing deferral, as mentioned by Councillor Gajewski, and thank you very much indeed, Andy, for digging out the relevant paragraphs, neither of them discuss the short time that has elapsed between the ELAC meeting and today. And that is the absolute core of why myself and Councillor Parker-Jones are pushing for deferral. We know that we have all been working so hard to prepare for this meeting, members and officers. We have prepared as well as we possibly can. We have all checked to ensure that we tick the boxes with regards to predetermination. But our ability to prepare and to reset our thinking to ensure that we are open-minded has been limited massively by the rushed timing. We have not had technical briefings. We are not experts, but we need to understand the evidence. The briefings would have been really useful, arguably essential, to build that understanding. I'd like to reiterate my point from earlier, that to allow members of council to take this decision properly, we need to be properly trained, we need to be properly open-minded, and with all critical aspects of the application properly prepared. We should absolutely be deferring this meeting. Thank you, members. Thank you, Deputy Mayor.
Thank you very much, Councillor Tidridge. In that case now, we will now move to the vote on the emergency motion, which will be shown on the screen, and Laura Johnson will take a recorded vote. So I will now pass over to Laura Johnston, please. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. Councillor Airy.
Against.
Councillor Allingham.
For.
Councillor Asman.
Against.
Councillor Atkinson.
Against.
Councillor Bearder.
For.
Councillor Bicknell.
Against.
Councillor Bourne.
Against.
Councillor Broadhurst.
Against.
Councillor Campbell.
Councillor Campbell is absolutely outraged and she is for the current motion.
Councillor Clark.
In favour of the motion.
Councillor Corbin.
Against.
Councillor Caldry.
Against.
Councillor Craig.
Against.
Councillor Cross.
Against.
Councillor Dean.
For.
Councillor Doogie.
For.
Councillor Dogood.
For.
Councillor Garton.
Against.
Councillor Gomer.
Against.
Councillor Grajewski.
Against.
Councillor Groves.
Against.
Councillor Holes.
Against.
Councillor House.
Against.
Councillor Irish.
For.
Councillor Jerd.
For.
Councillor Curl.
Against.
Councillor Mann.
Against.
Councillor Manning.
Against.
Councillor Marsh.
For.
Councillor Parker Jones.
For.
Councillor Pragnell.
Against.
Councillor Pretty.
Against.
Councillor Rich.
Against.
Councillor Tennant. Councillor Tennant. Councillor Tennant. Councillor Tidridge.
For.
Councillor Trace.
Against.
Councillor Tyson Payne.
For.
And Councillor Tennant, are you there? I think we dropped him out. Okay. Chair, I'm just going to tot the numbers up and I'll let you know.
Thank you.
That's 13 for, Chair. The rest against. The motion is lost.
It's lost, right? Okay. Thank you very much. And I just apologise to Councillor Campbell. I did actually say that we would end the debate at a particular point. I do apologise to you, but I think it's necessary that it didn't go on for too long. Thank you very much, especially as we have members of the public who are wishing to speak today. Right, so we will now move on to item 4, which is the presentation of the planning guidelines. And I'll ask the Head of Housing and Development, Andy Granfield, who will now present those. Thank you, Andy.
Thank you, Chair. I'll just share my screen. So if you could have, if you can let me know once it's showing, that'd be great. Thank you.
Yeah, we can see those. Thank you, Andy.
You see that? Okay,
Yeah,
excellent. Thank you. Unusual to do a planning guidelines before full council, but it's a common practice to do it in front of the local area committees, and it sets the scene for within which a planning application has to be determined, and what's material and what isn't. So when looking at a planning application, it's got to be determined on planning grounds, and when forming a view, the committee, or in this case the full council, must have regard to the development plan, which is the adopted local plan, as well as any other material considerations. So other material considerations can be the emerging local plan, and also any other policy guidance which is produced in terms of supplementary documents, etc. Also of relevance is national planning guidance, and in this instance, with this particular application, national aviation guidance is also relevant. The National Planning Policy Framework is material because that in some areas will take precedent over our adopted local plan, where policies are considered to be out of date or out of step with the NPPF, which was produced much more recently than the adopted local plan, and there will be more explained about that during the process of this application. In terms of the NPPF, it just sets out a few criteria here as to what the NPPF is promoting. It's about sustainable development and promoting that without delay. It does focus highly on the economy and good standards of design and looking to prevent and mitigate impacts. There are 3 strands that run through the NPPF, 3 strands of sustainability. So it's about the economic, the social and the environmental sustainability of development. And those 3 sometimes competing elements do need to be compared and weighed against each other when forming a view. Within the NPPF itself, it is quite light on aviation and development within airfields, but paragraph 104F does make reference to general aviation development. Some of the other matters which members will be asked to consider as part of this development is looking at the planning history and any other appeal decisions. Site-specific policies related to the site, and in this case, this is an allocated site, and therefore there is a site-specific policy. The more usual matters which we ask members to consider are the sort of the technical details around highways or impact on amenity, infrastructure, biodiversity, to name just a few of the issues, as well as taking into account consultee views and those expressed by third parties. They also need to be considered in forming any decision on a planning application. And precedent or case law is also something which can be relevant at times to applications. There are a host of things which are non-planning issues, and they're set out on the screen at the moment. Just to pick a few out, devaluation of property is not a material planning consideration, nor are matters which are covered by other regulations such as building control. There are 2 distinct types of applications, but the one to focus on here is the full application, which is what we're asking members to consider today. So it does have all the details, so it's the principle and the detail that you're considering under this full application. And if the process is such that the application is supported, then there are conditions proposed, and some of those conditions would require further information to be submitted. Now, that's not unreasonable or unnecessary, but the conditions are deemed necessary by officers to make an application acceptable. When putting a condition onto a planning application, we do have to ensure they comply with 6 tests which are set out on the bottom of the screen there, just to ensure that they are necessary and they do what officers and the council wish them to achieve, and that they're reasonable to comply with. And that's it, Chair, in terms of the planning guidelines. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Andy. So we will now move to item 5, which is indeed the planning application for Southampton International Airport, Mitchell Way, Eastleigh. Please can I remind councillors that they must be present for the duration of the item in order to be able to vote. If councillors lose connection, they must notify us so that the meeting can be paused until they are able to rejoin. I will now ask Laura to take a roll call to confirm who is present at the start of this item. Laura, thank you.
Chair. Councillor Airy.
Present.
Councillor Allingham.
Present.
Councillor Asman.
Present.
Councillor Atkinson.
Present.
Councillor Bearder.
Present.
Councillor Bicknell.
Present.
Councillor Councillor Bourne. Councillor Bourne.
Present.
Councillor Broadhurst.
Present.
Councillor Campbell.
Present.
Councillor Clark.
Present.
Councillor Corbin.
Present.
Councillor Caldry.
Present.
Councillor Craig.
Present.
Councillor Cross.
Present.
Councillor Dean.
Present.
Councillor Doogie.
Present.
Councillor Dogood.
Present.
Councillor Garton.
Present.
Councillor Gomer.
Present.
Councillor Grajewski.
Present.
Councillor Groves.
Present.
Councillor Holes.
Present.
Councillor House.
Present.
Councillor Irish.
Present.
Councillor Jaird.
Present.
Councillor Curl.
Present.
Councillor Mann.
Present.
Councillor Manning.
Present.
Councillor Marsh.
Present.
Councillor Parker Jones.
Present.
Councillor Pragnall.
Present.
Councillor Pretty.
Present.
Councillor Rich.
Present.
Councillor Tennant.
Present.
Councillor Tidridge.
Present.
Councillor Trace.
Present.
And Councillor Tyson Payne.
Present.
Thank you, Chair. That's a full house.
Thank you very much, Laura. In that case, then, can I ask Andy Granfield to please present the report? Thank you, Andy.
Chair, he's muted.
Andy, I think you might be muted at this time.
There we go. Hopefully you can hear me now, Chair.
We can hear you now. Thank you, Andy.
Okay, I will try and share my presentation again. If you could let me know, please, once you can see it on the screen, that'd be great.
You can see that, Andy.
Yeah, excellent. Thank you, Chair. Okay, so it was quite a lengthy presentation at ELAC, and it's planning to be a lengthy presentation again, just so that all the information is before all councillors to be informed of the issues, the consultation responses when forming their views. So I'm not apologising for that, but it's going to take probably about an hour or so to go through that. But there will be a lot of repetition. There's a couple of slight updates which I will come on to. So in terms of the application itself, just set the scene. The application is for 164 metre extension onto the existing runway. Associated with that is a blast screen at the northern end of the runway. And to facilitate the expansion of a car park along the western boundary, there would be a removal of an existing bund. This is a development of a scale which falls within Schedule 2 of the environmental impact regulations, and therefore has to be supported by an environmental statement where there potentially are significant adverse effects as a result of the development. And the environmental statement is made up of many chapters, which I'm sure members you've familiarised yourselves with, and there are many technical issues, many of which are actually competing with each other. And as part of this planning application, members, you will be asked to consider what's called the planning balance, the benefits against the disbenefits of this scheme. There are policies which it conflicts with, and there are policies which it's in compliance with, and that informing of you is termed the planning balance. There are a number of material issues which members you're asked to consider, and they're set out within the report, and they refer to adopted policies, emerging policies, supplementary planning guidance, national planning guidance, and aviation policies, to name just a few. In terms of updates presented at ELAC, there were quite a few updates, but they've already been embedded in the reports that members have before them, so I won't reiterate those. However, there are a couple of updates that I will advise members of, which have been secured since the report was published last week. So there was a lot of conversation at the ELAC meeting around the health strategy and the community health fund, and opportunities needed to be explored as to actually what could be achieved with that funding. And so in the intervening 10 days, we've been negotiating with the airports on this particular matter, and they have agreed that there does need to be some front loading of the work needed to underpin the health strategy. And as a result of that, they have agreed to an upfront payment, a one-off upfront payment of £100,000 on commencement of the development. In addition to that, once air traffic movements reach the 2020 baseline level, they will pay £2 per additional flight each year above that baseline level. And then that will continue through to when they reach their maximum number of air traffic movements, which will be around about the 3 million passenger mark. And every year thereafter, they will make a contribution which would be index linked of approximately £32,000, which would go into that community health fund. We've also considered how that fund would be best governed. Previously, I advised members that that would be taken through the airport consultative committee route. But having had regards to the sort of transparency of that process, we feel that actually there could be an improved governance process put into place, and that a separate committee with representatives from the airport, Eastleigh, Southampton Council and Hampshire County Council, and potentially some community organisations or voluntary groups could be formed, and they would be presented with options and opportunities of how best to utilise that funding. As part and parcel of that, we think there would need to be a great deal of community engagement and research to establish exactly where that money would be best spent to target the impacts as a result of this development. Twyford Parish Council have reiterated their objections, and I've flagged it up on this particular slide because they aren't referenced within the printed committee report. So they have previously made comments in December 2019, but I don't think that's covered in the report. So I've just added that on there for an update. And should this application be resolved to approve, the tabled recommendation is to delegate the decision back to myself in consultation with the chair and the vice chair of full council. However, since publication of the report, we've explored that further, and we feel that should be in consultation with the chair and the vice chair of the Eastleigh Local Area Committee. And just one slight typo to update on: in condition 3B, that should read the construction of the car park and not the construction of the car. As I did with the ELAC committee, I think it's worth just clarifying two fairly fundamental points. There's been talks about passenger caps within the ELAC reports, and to a lesser extent referenced within the full council report. And there is no cap on passenger movements proposed as part of this application. There is, however, a cap on vehicle movements of about 2.5 million vehicle movements per year, and that's to fall within the capacity of the highway network. And having had regard to the number of people that are arriving by cars and passenger occupancy of cars, that equates to circa 3 million passengers. So that is why often you will find within the report reference to circa 3 million passengers per annum. Also, policy 115E is an adopted policy for the airport site itself, and it's just to confirm that criteria 5 of that particular policy advises that there should be no effective extensions of the runway. Now, that is quite a firm statement, but there's no flexibility with that, and that is out of step with the MPPF and aviation policy. So that particular element of that policy is not considered to be up to date. So running through the plans themselves and looking at the scheme you've got before you, Your plan on the left-hand side shows in red the application site, and blue the aviation site, also continuing down to the motorway. We've got wide lane on the western side of the site, Itchen Valley Country Park on the eastern side, and we can see Eastleigh Railway Works to the north of the application site. The site is in the countryside, but it's also in the strategic gap, and there's also an area of landscape improvements required as allocated within the adopted local plan. However, as I've already mentioned, this is an allocated site within both the adopted and the submitted local plan for the airport and aviation development, and therefore that has to be considered in context with the policies related to countryside and strategic gap, which I will come on to later. Looking at it in slightly more detail, the area in green is where the car park extension would go, and also a realignment of Mitchell Way. In yellow is the runway extension in this location here, and we can just see it at this northern part of the site. This is the positioning of the blast screen, which is a 3-metre high screen. In terms of photos of the site, as you'd expect, it's very flat once within the development, and it's enclosed with a security fence. Over towards the car park, the existing car park and the proposed extended car park, this is the bund which is referenced as needing to be removed to facilitate the extended car park itself. The bund has some ecological value, but not of such value that its removal should be avoided. So looking at slightly more detail, looking at the runway itself, we can see the 164-metre extension in grey on the screen. The boundary fence would be slightly realigned at this northern end of the site. And if I move on to the next picture, we can see the blast screen itself, which is 3 metres high and approximately 1.5 metres in width at its base. Turning to the car park extension, the existing car park is highlighted with this circular shape, with the extended car park along the western boundary, and then between that and the perimeter of the site would be the realigned Mitchell Way. This plan shows the drainage structure, and the drainage would tap in to the existing arrangements, which is utilising a number of methodologies to ensure that the water would be clean before being dispersed into the ground itself. There is also a rising main running across the site, a foul rising main running across the site in this location, which would need to be diverted as part and parcel of the development process. There's also reference in the report to a high pressure gas main, which runs along the edge of where the car park, proposed extended car park, would go, and around this northern end of the site. And you will notice within your report there is an objection for Southern Gas Network. That is an objection subject to the airports going through the Southern Gas Network's own approval route. It's not an objection in principle to the development, it's an objection that they have not so far sought permission of Southern Gas Network to move or to build around the gas pipeline itself. So I think to start off with, now we've kind of looked at the plans and talked about the sort of the planning process, the context within which this development needs to be considered is quite important. And the application has been put before the council to consider because the runway is relatively short. It is one of the shorter ones, commercial runways within the United Kingdom. And as part and parcel of the airport's master plan, they wish to extend the runway to offer greater choice of destinations and further distances to fly. With the runway at the length it is at the moment, there are some limitations in terms of the weights of planes that could be taken off, and that is reflected in sometimes the planes, and quite often the planes, not having full capacity of passengers on board or full fuel, all of which limits the opportunities available to aircraft users. With the loss of Flybe, which happened within about 2 to 3 months of this application being submitted, the airport noticed a significant drop, circa 90% drop in their commercial flights from the site. And therefore, as part and parcel of this runway extension, is to build in a bit more resilience to the business plan of the airport itself. I've already touched on the vehicle movements and 2.45 million vehicle movements per year, and that is approximately 3 million passengers. And from when the application was first submitted, the baseline, so the starting point for where we assess the increased impact of development, has significantly changed. That baseline has dropped from approximately 2 million passengers per year to just under 1 million passengers a year. That is taking into account the recovery from the COVID impact, which is likely to take 2 to 3 years before we see aviation move back to where it was. Now, there's been a lot of conversations, a lot of comments and a lot of speculation about the viability of the business, and I think the report fairly sets this out, that there is a break-even point which the airport feel they need to get to, which is about 1.2 million passengers per year, and currently, subject to recovery from COVID, they will be just under, the airport would be just under that. So there have been questions raised about the viability of the business. Now, I've made it quite clear at the ELAC committee that viability would be an issue the airport need to consider if the runway is not supported. But it doesn't mean that the airport would close as a result of the application being refused, should it be refused. There are alternative areas for funding that the airport would need to explore, alternative business plans, and it would be difficult. But members, I do need to advise that the airport have not asked us to consider that the runway is the only way in which the airport could remain as a business. And with all the information that's been provided to members and to officers to consider, the impacts of COVID has been considered short term and are not reflected in the baseline information. So for a little bit of context, I've put it on the screen here, the passenger numbers without the proposed development, and this is set out within the environmental statement addendum number 2, which was submitted in January. And we can see the slow stepped increase in passenger numbers and air traffic movements, ATMs, as we move through from 2020 to 2027 up to 2037. And the table below is with the proposed development, so that's with the runway extension. And we can see that would see a potential increase from just under 1 million passengers in 2020 up to 3.35 million passengers in 2037. Now, as set out within the report, we have looked at caps around vehicle movements and those caps would see passenger numbers restricted to approximately 3 million passengers. And it's anticipated that the airport would recover and would see a growth in passenger numbers up to 3 million by about 2033. So turning to the key considerations that members have to take on board. As already alluded to, the site is within the countryside and the development doesn't sit comfortably within the criteria set out within policy 1CO. So there is a conflict with that policy. And there's also a conflict with policy 2CO, strategic gap, because that policy requires development which has a physical or visual impact on the gap, which is there to prevent the coalescence of built form, that it should be refused. However, as I've mentioned, this is an allocated site within the countryside and the gap, and that the policy itself is supportive of aviation development. And therefore, members, you will have to sort of consider that whilst it is contrary to the key objectives of 1 and 2 CO, actually this is an airport and that in itself is an established use. I've already mentioned that policy 115E, which is the airport's own policy, isn't flexible because it does say that there should be no runway extensions, and that is at odds with national guidance. So the impact on the countryside and the strategic gap is negligible. There is a physical impact as a result of the development and a very limited visual impact. And as set out within the report, we've concluded that that in itself is not grounds for refusing this development. Because the development is at odds with 115E and it's at a step with the NPPF insofar of runway extensions, we do have to consider the presumption in favour of development being applied and balancing the benefits against the disbenefits as we move through, and also looking at the aviation policy, which, as set out within the report, it does encourage in a couple of documents making best use of existing runway and infrastructure. So turning through to some of the technical issues, from a highways perspective, we've looked at the modelling in consultation with the Highways Agency and Southampton City Council and Hampshire County Council, and have concluded that the methodology used and the approach is acceptable, that 2.5 million vehicle movements a year is reasonable. But to ensure that there's no additional impacts that have not been assessed as part of the environmental statement, officers need to ensure that traffic movements do not exceed that upper figure of 2.45 million. And therefore, as part and parcel of Section 106, there is a vehicle cap proposed to limit car movements to a maximum of 2.45 million. Now, that would be monitored through automatic number plate recognition, and a report's produced annually on the movement of vehicles and various mechanisms in place, including enforcement options, to ensure that that Section 106 isn't breached. The development itself, obviously the construction period of 34 weeks will generate an element of traffic movements, but that can be adequately controlled via conditions as set out within the Construction Environmental Management Plan within the report itself.
Andy, you've gone mute.
I think we've lost you, Andy. I think you've gone to mute again.
Can you hear me now, Chair?
Yes, I can hear you now, Andy. Thank you.
That's my fault. I paused to take a drink of water and couldn't find the mute button to unmute myself, so apologies.
Thank you.
In terms of the trip generation, which you have on the screen here, we've looked at the amount of traffic movements that would be associated with the development and their sort of peak time movements, and how that would then impact on junctions and the distribution of the vehicle movements across the highway network. And that's been scrutinised by the various highway authorities, including Highways England. And there's a single point of access into the site, which then disperses across 4 directions, 4 roundabouts and 4 junctions. And having had regard to the traffic movement and comparing it to peak time traffic movements that currently exist, there would be a negligible impact on existing junctions, such that Hampshire County Council's Highways Authority and Highways England are not seeking any further mitigation as a result of this development. That is subject to the vehicle cap being applied. In terms of parking, we've seen the application reduced from approximately 600 parking spaces down to 460, 470, and that's as a direct result of the consultation responses that have come in and considering the need for that car parking and not over providing. It also reflects the need to retain some of the landscaping and to improve the ecological environment around the car park, and to create a more enhanced setting and add screening to the car park itself. We have, within the report, updated, and this was mentioned at the ELAC meeting, we've updated the phasing of that car park delivery to coincide with the need as passenger numbers grow. and so that is conditioned within the recommendation. It's also very relevant to ensure that the Chickenham Lane link road isn't prejudiced by this development, and that is set out within the report and policy reference both in the adopted and the submitted local plan, and the importance of that valuable piece of infrastructure moving forward, not just for vehicular access avoiding Eastleigh, but also to unlocking the opportunities for some of the further employment sites to the east of the airport and to the north on the railway works. And as part of the Section 106 agreement, the development would ensure that that land is safeguarded for the Chickenham Lane link road, and it would not be obstructed by this development itself. In terms of access, it remains unchanged coming into Mitchell Way, and that can operate safely and conveniently. And as part and parcel of the development, a draft airport surface access strategy has been submitted, which sets out opportunities to improve access through sustainable modes of transport. And currently, the proportion of people using non-car modes to get to the airport is around about 25%. And so within the Section 106, we're securing additional targets to move it up to 30% by 2033. Now, noise is by far probably the biggest, alongside climate, concern that have been raised through the 8,000 comments that have come in so far on this development. And that is recognised in aviation policy, that there is an impact of noise from increased use of airports. However, the policy does say that we need to seek to balance out against the economic benefits of a development, but that doesn't necessarily one doesn't necessarily override the other. National aviation policy talks about making proportionate contributions or financial contributions to mitigating noise impact on properties, and both the NPPF and local plan policy, certainly the emerging local plan policies, talk about minimising adverse noise impacts. There's a lot of reference in the committee report itself to the lowest observed adverse effect level and the significant adverse and an unacceptable observed level, and the dBs or the decibels related to that. Now, the unacceptable observed adverse effect levels is 69 dB or more, and the contours that we've got would not exceed that moving forward. But there are properties, which I'll come on to, which fall within the above the significant observed adverse level of 63 decibels. And informing the baseline for noise and looking at the forecast future growth, we've had regards to the direction planes are taking off in, and currently approximately 72% of movements do head southwards, either coming in from the south or taking off to the south. So there is a noticeable impact, particularly more so to the south than to the north. However, as we will see from the noise contours, there would be impact to properties north and to the west of the airport itself. Informing the noise impact assessment and forecasting, the airport provided the local authority with a proposed fleet mix or forecast fleet mix, which is based on the likely makeup of aircraft over the next 15-16 years who would be using the airport itself. And that's as a direct result of Flybe going out of business, and their use of smaller aircraft is very unlikely to be repeated and replicated to the same degree by other operators. But what we would see is an increase in the larger planes. The A320s are significantly increased in 2033, and that will see, whilst there'll be less overall flights, there'll be larger planes that will be using the airport. A320s have used the airport in the past, but they are their numbers are very low in comparison to the smaller Dash 8 planes that Flybe used. The baseline for 2020 will see approximately 67 air traffic movements on an average summer's day, and that's working out over like a 92-day period, and that would increase almost double by 2033 to 118, which is slightly less than I think 137 was for the 2016, the original baseline figures we were given in 2019 itself. So using that that noise information, contours can be produced to predict where the noise levels would be, and looking at where the properties or the businesses or the commercial activities which will be most affected by noise in the future. But firstly, looking at the construction noise, the construction period is for a total of 34 weeks, although there is potential that could be reduced once we're looking at the availability of possibly further work during the day at weekends, because the runway itself is restricted to nighttime work to avoid a clash with the use of the airport. And it is worth noting that the runway itself, whilst it is nighttime work between 2300 hours and 0600 hours, there would be no weekend work or no bank holiday work there. The car park itself, though, would be traditional hours between 8 and, I should say, 6 p.m. on a Monday to Saturday, with again no work on Sundays or bank holidays. And to ensure that that is managed sufficiently, we're recommending a construction environmental management plan be submitted, which would secure various controls that the local authority can ensure are enforced, including best practice, and looking at a Section 61 licence through the environmental protection route, which the airport would need to apply to the local authority for, and those would all be secured by condition. So this is a slide that I've shown you before in terms of the increase in air traffic movements, and we can see that without the development in 2037 we would be just under 23,000 air traffic movements. With the development, that increases to just under 40,000, so quite a significant increase in numbers there, and also those numbers would reflect larger and potentially noisier planes. It's worth mentioning that as part and parcel of this development, whilst there have been discussions about technological improvements and the quietening of planes as we move forward, that hasn't been factored into any of the calculations, so this truly is the worst case scenario that the airport have put before members. On the screen is the noise contours that have been produced, showing on the left hand side the baseline figure of 2020 based on the 23,000 air traffic movements, with the highest concentration of noise in this core here, expanding out to a 51 dB contour on the outer edge. For context, we can see on the right hand side the proposed or the forecast modelled noise impact, and it's quite difficult to see on this particular plan how the contours have expanded. So my next plan, which I did share with ELAC, shows how this is how the noise contours have increased over that period of time. So we can see that the 51 dB, which is the sort of the lowest observed level where there could be an adverse impact from noise, has expanded northwards quite considerably, and also south into Southampton, and there's a slight expansion out to the west and to the east itself. So when looking at operational noise, obviously we're looking at in terms of the air traffic movements, and the passenger numbers have been forecast around 3 million. That has allowed the airport to forecast how many flights that equates to, and that has then informed the noise contours. And added into that, we have also been provided with information about individual noise events, so one-off events and how often they happen, rather than a continuous approach, which is how noise contours are calculated. And it's fair to say that within this future scenario, there would be a major adverse impact without mitigation as a result of noise on the local community and further afield as far as potentially up to Shawford direction, when looking at where the 51 dB contour extends to. That's not to say those properties don't already experience an element of noise, but by moving into a 51 dB bracket, that could mean that noise becomes more of a concern to residents in those areas. Government guidance in the aviation policy framework does recommend that there should be financial assistance towards acoustic insulation of properties over when properties fall within the 63 dB contour. And the guidance doesn't say that it should cover all of the cost of installation, and it certainly sets that as a minimum 63 dB. It doesn't say it should be prohibited, but it said it should be avoided as well. And it's also recognised both within the report and the consultative responses that an increase in noise can have an impact on an adverse effect on health and quality of life. So it's quite important when balancing the benefits and disbenefits that the members are aware that is something which potentially could be an impact of this development, an impact on people's quality of life. There's also an impact on sensitive buildings, and schools and hospitals fall within that, and the report sets out how that's been assessed, particularly with regards to Bitton Park, which that's been referenced a number of times in both objections and in consultee comments. And as part and parcel of this development proposal, the airport have submitted the framework for a noise insulation policy, which would set out how they would intend to tackle and mitigate the impact of noise. Now, a noise action plan is already in place. There was one secured in 1992 when the application for the terminal was approved, and that built in a number of mitigation measures around preferred routes for planes, excluding particular noisy planes. And so we've considered those as inherent mitigations. That's already bedded into how the application has to be assessed. And so we don't double count those as mitigation measures. However, this scheme does secure a number of additional measures which aren't currently in place. And it's worth just quickly running through those. This development via the Section 106 would secure a noise contour cap, and that would say that noise levels must be contained to 51 dB and a certain size of area. Currently, if the airport did use noisier planes, there is no maximum size in terms of how far that 51 dB contour could spread. So we're able to control the number of properties which are impacted as a result of this development. We've also agreed with the airport, we've negotiated with them a much improved noise insulation package from the first one submitted, which was £3,000 per property, any property over 63 decibels, and that was potentially a contribution to the insulation and not the full cost of it. However, over the last few months, we have managed to secure a much improved package, which has lowered that level down to 60 decibels, with an average of £5,000 per property, but with no additional cost to homeowners if it goes over that £5,000. And as part and parcel of that mitigation package, it will need to include and have regards to the potential for overheating and the ventilation of properties, because of overheating inside. We need to make sure that they've got some form of natural ventilation or through wall ventilation. Now, all that will be secured through the Section 106, will be reported on an annual basis to the local authority, and forecasts built in as to which properties may be affected over the forthcoming 2 or 3 years. So we can ensure that the impact is mitigated before it actually is achieved or it's actually felt. So, as I say, that is a significant control that doesn't currently exist. In addition, the airport can operate from 6 o'clock in the morning, and 6 to 7 is still classed as nighttime in noise calculations. And currently there are no controls over how many planes can fly between 6 and 7. So again, as part of this application, there is a requirement, or there would be a requirement within Section 106, that only a maximum of 20 flights, either in or out, could happen during that what's called the shoulder hour, 6 till 7 o'clock. Now, it's not to say there won't be impacts as a result of this development, but officer's view is the impact, the residual impact, has dropped from a major to a moderate adverse impact. There is some conflict with adopted policies, but I think that needs to be considered in the planning balance. Now, in terms of ground noise, so the operations on the ground, planes moving, taxiing, etc., and the movement of people to and from the airport itself. The environmental statement considers that to be negligible to low in terms of noise impacts, and officers agree with that. Now, in terms of climate change, the second big issue that members are really being asked to grapple with, and certainly officers have as well, is looking at the emissions that are created as a result of this development. Now, the majority of those emissions, 99%, are going to come from air traffic movements, so in flight, planes in flight. There are some impacts as a result of people accessing the site and also the ground operations themselves. But it's very clear in terms of national aviation policy that emissions from planes should be tackled at a national level and certainly globally. And that is set out in the national aviation policy. And it would be wrong for a local authority to refuse a development solely on grounds of an impact of emissions without having regard to national policy and its direction that should be tackled at a local level. And the reason a national level, and the reason it's tackled nationally is to ensure that there's no leakage of if we put restrictions on a local airport, it doesn't mean that those people won't fly. There will be a leakage of people to use other airports, and it doesn't necessarily mean that the total carbon emissions aren't still met. It's also worth noting that in terms of calculating carbon emissions and greenhouse gases, the government have committed to achieving currently a reduction in emissions by 2050, and they've, in assessing the total output of emissions, which aviation is a relatively small part but contributes to it, the government have committed to ensuring that they do achieve that national target. Now, that is something which the 6th Carbon Budget is considering, and as the Climate Change Committee have recommended changes to the emissions. However, at the moment, that isn't policy, it is guidance, and it would be wrong for the local authority to pre-guess how the government may react to that recommendations and how they may seek to achieve the targets which are now being proposed. It's not specific to aviation. The 6th Carbon Budget, it covers all service sectors that generate emissions, and therefore, whilst there are some fairly clear recommendations made by the Climate Change Committee, it is recommendations and not policy, and members, you are asked to consider this based on policy. So in terms of construction, there is a negligible impact as a result of the construction process, and officers agree with that. And in terms of the operation of the airport, that's where the biggest impact is felt. And the information provided to us, the calculations provided, we feel are robust, are in line with best practice, and that there would potentially be a moderate adverse and significant impact prior to mitigation. Now, construction impacts can be mitigated through the Construction Environment Management Plan, as I've already referenced, and the operational, we have to look at what is within the control of the airport, what can they control themselves, and those are called the Scope 1 emissions, and so that's their own ground-based efforts, and the airport have committed to ensuring that they become, or they are, net zero and that they will submit a carbon strategy which will see them converting or replacing their ground vehicles to electric and minimising their emissions as much as possible, their own direct emissions. It's also worth noting that with the large number of people who are accessing the site via non-car modes, via sustainable transport, by putting in a high target of 30% within the Section 106, that is actively discouraging people from coming by more harmful means, so but through cars. And so that also, with the staff green travel plan, would be secured through Section 106. So it does demonstrate the commitment from the airport to tackle the emissions which they control. The Scope 3 emissions, it says re-emissions on there, but it's actually Scope 3 emissions, so the in-flight. It's quite clear that if the airport were asked to offset those, that would be double counting, because that's already been considered within the national guidance, and so it's something which the airport are not needing to offset based on current national policy. So I've already talked about the sixth carbon budget, and we don't know what the government's response to it, but more locally we've got the climate and environmental emergency, which Eastleigh declared back in July 2019, and that's detailed in my report. Now it is material, but it's not planning policy. So it's material decisions I think the council should make, and they must have regards to it. And I think it's as part and parcel of that is we do have to consider what is within the control of the airport, and they have committed to minimising their own emissions. So I think there is recognition that needs to be given to that. Now, members, it's for you to place the weight that you think appropriate to our own climate and environmental emergency, but the fact that we have declared a climate and environmental emergency is in itself not reason to refuse the development on principal grounds. We've also, as part of the environmental statement, had information provided to show that the scheme does ensure there's climate change resilience, and that can be controlled through various conditions as outlined on the presentation before you. Moving on to air quality, there are air quality management areas within Eastleigh and Southampton which have been assessed as part and parcel of this development, and these air quality management areas have been designated primarily around the impact of road traffic and the emissions as a result of that. The construction effects of the development have been assessed, and they have been found to only have a minor adverse impact on amenity, which is negligible in terms of impact on human health and ecology, and that can be adequately controlled via the conditions before members. In terms of the operational effects, when looking at air quality, that has also been assessed, and we're comfortable with the methodology that's been used for that. And it is noted that in terms of the NOx emissions, that there would be a slight adverse impact on 2 areas out of 72 that were assessed, and they are within the Southampton Road area itself. This position is considered acceptable by officers, but we will need to continue monitoring the air quality management area to ensure that the emissions are reduced in those areas. But it is felt that the development itself would not result in any exceedances of either the NOx emissions or the particle matters, which is set out in a little bit more detail within the committee report itself. So the development itself would not undermine the air quality action plan objectives either for Eastleigh or Southampton. Turning to human health, the authority have undertaken an equality impact assessment and have considered that the processing, the consideration of this scheme is not going to undermine or unduly, the process isn't going to undermine or unduly affect those protected characteristics, and there is an equality impact assessment online. And we've also considered the potential impacts and effects of the development on a study area, and we're happy with the methodology in which has been used to consider that. It has been updated significantly from when it was first submitted in direct response to comments of Public Health England. So in terms of the construction phase, that is short term, and we can mitigate the impact of that through the Construction Environmental Management Plan, and that will ensure that there's a very low or negative stroke neutral impact on the local community. Employment opportunities would be generated through this window for a range of types of jobs, and that will be secured, or there'll be an employment and skills plan secured as part and parcel of Section 106, which will seek to target those within the local area with the opportunity to get some experience in working some of these projects on the site itself. So there is a slight positive impact as a result of that. The environmental statement, which officers agree with, has demonstrated that in terms of construction, there's no impact on education, crime, social capital and key health determinants. Now, in terms of the operational impact, the primary impact is going to be through noise. We have considered the very detailed chapter set out within the environmental statement addendum 2, and had regards to the various potential vulnerable and targeted members of community within that. And it is fair to say that there is potential impact on smokers or those with long-term lung conditions. And the report, the environment statement, does set out in quite a lot of detail how that's assessed, and the numbers and the percentage of people within the population that could be affected by this development, including those who may suffer from mental health disorders. And noise can and does impact particularly on those who suffer from mental health disorders. And we note that that's a moderate adverse effect on those members of the community. Equally, there would be an impact on users of outdoor space, because the mitigation so far has been looking at the insulation of dwellings, and we are looking at how best that impact on the outdoor space can be mitigated. It's very difficult to avoid it, but looking at how that could be mitigated, and I'll come on to that a little bit more in the health strategy comments shortly. The noise insulation policy and the noise contour gap and the noise action plan are all welcomed, and they do seek to minimise the number of properties who are affected, in the number of the populations both within Eastleigh and the surrounding area. But they are targeting predominantly the indoor environment by limiting the area for the 51 dB contour. We are protecting to a degree the outdoor space and ensuring it doesn't expand beyond 16.1 kilometres. But that doesn't go sufficiently far to address all the impacts. And so, as reported at the ELAC meeting a couple of weeks ago, as part of the Section 106 agreement, there would be a health strategy which would set out a mechanism for ensuring that the community most affected by this development, in terms of their quality of life, can actually have can see some improvements, and we could look at targeting how the community would benefit as a result of this development. And I think that's quite clear within the national policy as well, that it does talk about the community and what benefits they may derive from a development. Now, as I alluded to right at the very beginning of this presentation, the Community Health Fund has moved on significantly from where we were 2 weeks ago. So there's actually a real opportunity as part of this development to secure some fairly substantial funding up front, and then a continuation of that funding in perpetuity to invest in particular projects, be it improving access to outdoor space, targeting members of community or community groups who are directly affected by this development, and working with those communities to improve the quality of life that they experience. And that is something which currently doesn't exist as part and parcel of the airport's package of measures. So that is a significant improvement on where we were even a couple of weeks ago. The operational phase will create a number of jobs, both at construction and operational, and that is certainly seen as a very significant benefit in terms of this development. The study area that was used to assess human health has a slightly higher than average Eastleigh average for unemployment, so that's a real positive. In terms of education, there's been lots of comments raised about the impact on schools, and the airport, as part and parcel of the negotiated package, have agreed for a bespoke assessment of the impact on education facilities within the 51 dB contour, and that would be secured through a Section 106 agreement itself. So a combination of the mitigation that I've outlined, and certainly in more detail set out in the report, would see the residual impact reduced to a moderate adverse, but that's still an adverse effect which members you will need to consider in the planning balance. So running through the ecological side of it, we've assessed the scheme under our duties as a competent authority under the habitat regs, and I'm pleased to say that following the submission of our appropriate assessment, Natural England are not objecting to the development, and conditions have been recommended, particularly in regards to the management and maintenance of drainage facilities to ensure that there's no water pollution as a result of this. The report you've got before you does set out a number of designated sites and protected species which could be affected by this development, and the layers of importance given to those. And the impact on those has been assessed both at the operational and construction stage. And through conditions and by virtue of distances from properties, distances from designated features rather, officers are comfortable that during the construction process there would be no significant adverse harm to those designated areas. Turning to the operational side and looking at the on-ground activities. So in one of the plans I showed you at the start, I referenced the drainage arrangements, and having had regards to the detail of that and liaising with Natural England, our own ecology team, we feel there's adequate measures in place to ensure that there would be no adverse impact on the integrity of the River Itchen special area of conservation or any other designated sites as a result of water pollution. The impact of noise has already been assessed, as a result of the increase in traffic movements, both in terms of the qualifying features of these internationally protected areas, and it's been concluded that there would be no adverse effect on those designated areas, either in terms of the quality of the habitat or any protected species that reside within those. We've also had regards to nitrogen deposition, NOx as well, and it is concluded that there's no harmful impact, but we do wish to continue monitoring, and so as part and parcel of the Section 106 agreement and a biodiversity enhancement and management plan, we would be working with the airport to ensure that there was ongoing monitoring of air quality along the boundaries of their site, and that would be secured as part and parcel of the planning obligation. We've also had regards to nitrates, which is something which we see often on planning applications now as needing to be considered, and as a result of the movement of passengers predominantly going out to the area, if it's leisure flights, it's been concluded that on balance the increase in visitor numbers to the area is unlikely to result in any increase in nitrate loading, and therefore from an environmental perspective the officers are comfortable, as are Natural England, that there would be no harm to the Solent itself. Looking more specific details within the ecological side, the scheme has been assessed in terms of the grassland areas within the site. There would be a loss of some grassland, semi-improved grassland, particularly around the bund, which will be removed. But as part and parcel of the development proposal itself, there would be an enhancement package provided to improve habitat, green areas through additional planting and management of those areas themselves. That would see a very marginal increase in biodiversity net gain. Officers believe that to be about 0.58% above what's already on site. So it is an improvement which concurs with the NPPF, and again, as part of a condition and the Section 106, we would ensure that landscaping was undertaken. There are bats predominantly moving around the edge of the site, and there would be no significant impact on habitat loss as a result of this development, but we do need to ensure that through the construction process and the operational process that the bats are not disturbed as a result of lighting, and so conditions are recommended accordingly. There are low populations of reptiles on site, and conditions are also recommended to ensure that they are protected and translocated within the site itself as part and parcel of a biodiversity mitigation and enhancement plan. So there's no residual negative impact on reptiles, and there's been no evidence found on site of dormice, but there has been a precautionary approach adopted, and that again would be set out in terms of the planting mechanisms, protection of areas to ensure that hazel dormice would not be affected as a result of this, should they be on the periphery of the site. Running through some of the other areas which members you'll see set out in your report. Impact on trees. There would be a loss of some trees around the Bund area itself, but the trees themselves are not considered of high quality. And a replacement planting is proposed, and again that is conditioned. There has been a lot of comments raised about Marhill Copse and in terms of the impact on that as a result of this development. If you've got more planes taking off, is there an impact on those protected trees in Marhill Copse, which sit within the Southampton administrative area? And through various conversations and submission of technical details, the airport concluded there would be no harmful impact on trees within Marhill Copse, and it would continue to be managed under the current safeguarding arrangements. In terms of landscape, this area is identified as being predominantly affected by the airport itself in the landscape character assessment. And as I've already set out, whilst there would be an impact on the countryside and the strategic gap, it is minimal in terms of its visual impact and therefore is not considered to be unacceptable. Equally, there is no harmful impact on built heritage sites, conservation areas, but there is potential for some below ground archaeological features, and therefore there is a condition that recommended to ensure that they remain safeguarded throughout the construction process and operation of the site. In terms of drainage, the development itself is not considered to cause or result in flooding or be flooded itself. The drainage scheme is considered as being suitable, and it accords with sustainable drainage best practice. And we need to ensure, and we do through conditions, that both construction drainage and operational drainage would not harm features of importance adjacent to the site. So that is conditioned. Because of the history of the site and the previous uses, and certainly uses to the north, there is a condition recommended that further contamination surveys are undertaken, but that in itself isn't seen as a principal concern, and it can be addressed via condition, and there is no impact on minerals and waste as a result of this development. Equally, there's no material, there's no impact no concerns regarding accidents and hazards which haven't already been considered as part and parcel of the technical information provided to date. So turning, I think, finally to the social economic side, so the employment elements, the loss of Flybe certainly hit the airport itself and supported businesses around it, and we saw that the employment on site significantly dropped from circa 950 jobs to around 600 jobs. When you apply technological improvements to operation of airports and certainly looking to deliver the service in a much more efficient manner, it's forecast you could see a further 20 to 25% reduction in jobs as a result of that. So based on 1 million passengers, the airport would provide employment for around about 470 people on site. Now, we've already mentioned that the loss of Flybe has seen the baseline level drop from about 2 million passengers down to 1 million passengers. So there's been a direct impact on aircraft users as well. And these figures do not reflect the impact of COVID, which have seen it drop significantly further than that, but will bounce back. It's a short-term impact that's forecast. I think it's useful to provide some sort of policy context to the airports, and it's seen as one of the three gateways into South Hampshire, and it's featured very much within certainly Eastleigh's policy allocations for employment and opportunities for the last 20 years. And the corporate plan, Eastleigh's corporate plan, certainly as one of the strands in there, focuses on the prosperous place and encouraging suitable allocation of employment as a result of our own ongoing needs. There has been criticism levied at some of the economic assumptions, and I think it's right that it's not seen as set in stone. There has to be some uncertainty around this, and that's recognised by officers and set out within the report. However, the approach, the methodology, the assumptions and the limitations, I think are recognisable, they're accepted, and it's seen as certainly as the best means of measuring the social economic factors associated with this development. So there would be some short-term employment under the construction, but what we do see is a noticeable improvement, noticeable benefits as a result of the operational impact across probably 4 key areas. So air users, those wanting to fly from the airport, would see great opportunity of destinations to fly to, and an opportunity to travel locally rather than travelling further afield to use other airports either within the region or slightly further away. Whilst some of the routes that have been lost as a result of Flybe going into administration have been replaced by some other operators, they don't cover necessarily the same quantity of flights that go out to the routes that they've taken over, and there are certainly some routes which haven't been covered at all. So a runway extension would allow opportunity for greater connectivity for air users. I've already mentioned about the viability argument and whether this runway extension is essential to the survival of the airport, and I think it's certainly a very important point, but as I've already set out, whilst there is a break-even point, the runway extension would certainly assist the airport, but they haven't demonstrated that the airport would cease trading as a result of this application should it be refused. There would be an element of passenger leakage, and something which we've discussed at quite length at the ELAC committee, exactly how much that would be, but I think it's recognised that there would be passengers who would want to still fly and would travel to other airports if they weren't able to fly from Southampton. Looking at the employment side, there is an opportunity here if the runway was extended to see an increase from about 470 jobs, so it's around about 470 jobs per million passengers, per 1 million passengers, up to about 1,400 by 2037. So significant direct employment opportunities as a result of the activities on site. And there's also employment opportunities through indirect employment, so businesses which support the airport activities. And that in itself would see across the Solent Lep region, which is a fair area to measure it in because that falls within the catchment of the airport, that would see potentially jobs increase from just under 800 to 2,367. And there's also induced impacts as a result of increased employment. So it's the spending capacity of people which would be improved, and that in itself would see additional money being spent within the local area. And I think the area which is much harder to possibly quantify is the catalytic impacts as a result of the development. And so the benefits to local businesses that are in this area as a result of that employment or the additional spending that happens. And the information provided has used a sort of a national approach and factored it down to the Solent area. And officers have felt that's a reasonable approach to adopt, and that's shown that potentially could be up to a 2.8% increase in the Solent Lep itself. Also, a social economic consideration has to be housing, but as set out in the report, there's likely to be a neutral effect on the housing market itself because of the buoyancy of housing within Eastleigh and the level of number of houses that this scheme would actually generate needing as a result of people working in the area is going to be marginal. So that's considered to be a neutral effect. As already set out in a presentation, there is a policy context here we need to consider, and land to the east of the site is allocated for a northern business park, and that's within the airport boundary, whilst land to the north within Eastleigh Riverside is also allocated for employment. There's been some positive work between the airport and Diageo, who control the land to the north, about how they can work together to sort of meet the emerging local plans, economic needs as we move forward. And linked into that is the Chicken or Lane Link Road, which in itself is a very important piece of infrastructure. It's certainly been on the horizon for a number of years, and there is opportunity to secure land to deliver this southern part of the Chickenham Lane Link Road, and certainly the 106 agreement would ensure that that is the case. And whilst the application itself doesn't deliver this southern end, it certainly is not considered to prejudice its delivery moving forward. And there's information provided within the environment statement setting out how that could be achieved. But it is worth mentioning that neither of those policy allocations for employment to the east or to the north are dependent on the airport expansion. However, there has to be some elements of synergy there and attractiveness with an airport being on the doorstep. And I think that's also reflective in the recent successful Freeport bid, which incorporates Southampton Airport and land to the north. So we have got a site here which is very accessible both by rail, air and car. Now, there is in the report comments around other airports, and certainly Bournemouth Airport have made reputation at all stages of this application and had concerns raised about the impact on the airports, the investments that have been made over there, and also whether there's an overlapping of services which could be provided by Bournemouth Airport. Now, this has been considered within the environmental statements submitted, and for a number of years Bournemouth and Southampton have operated in harmony despite an overlap of catchment area, and officers do not believe that the scheme itself would fundamentally undermine Bournemouth Airport itself. And there's further information set out within the committee report on that. So finally, there are a number of conditions recommended, and those conditions are seen to be important and meet the tests which I mentioned right at the very beginning. And there are a number of planning obligations which the airport would be expected to sign up to, and we list them on the screen here, and they're all stuff which I've talked about already, so I won't spend too long on them. So as part of the heads of terms, we would be expecting a vehicle cap on traffic movements. Aligned to that, there would be a biannual review of the airport's own surface access strategy and the staffing green travel plan. So looking at ways and means which you can improve access through sustainable modes of transport. The noise insulation policy and the noise monitoring of noise contours is a significant betterment on where we're at the moment with the airport, and that would be secured through the Section 106, as would an air quality strategy and the health strategy and a carbon strategy. The ecological management and mitigation relating to air quality monitoring would also be secured through the Section 106 and inform any future improvements to the habitat. From an employment perspective, there's both construction and operational employment skills plans secured, which is a positive to the local and immediate community, and the Chickenham Lane Link Road would be safeguarded. Now, there's currently a previous Section 106 related to this site, which applied a number of restrictions, and those restrictions would be swept up by a new Section 106 agreement and expanded as set out on the screen for those other areas. So there's one document that we would be reviewing to ensure that the airport's impact was controlled to a suitable level. And obviously that would come at a cost to the local authority, so there will be a contribution towards that monitoring, which would be secured as well. So it's quite a lot of information there for members to consider, and also the detailed report itself. And as I said right at the start, there's a planning balance. There's some harm and there's some benefits as a result of this development. So members, as part and parcel of your consideration and deliberation of this application, you do need to weigh those up. The starting point for any planning application is the adopted local plan, and is the principle of development acceptable. It is an allocated site for aviation activity, but the expansion of a runway is not in accordance with adopted policy. There is an impact on the countryside. There is an impact, albeit negligible, on the strategic gap. So in terms of the next step, you've got to consider, are there other material considerations which weigh in favour of supporting or even refusing this development? So the NPPF, the National Planning Policy Framework, has a presumption in favour of sustainable development, and there is an inconsistency with adopted policy 115E, and therefore we have to look at the NPPF and certainly paragraph 104F and its support for development aviation as a starting point. Now that tips into, are there any other material considerations that you need to, as a committee, take into account? Unusually, this is an application where you have to take into account aviation policy and the encouragement to make better use of runways as a result of meeting the demand for air traffic use. And those policies certainly support improving existing infrastructure, and informing those policies has assessed what the impact on the climate would be, and that is set out in policy documents. Sort of turning to sort of the more local level, there is definitely an impact as a result of development on some elements of human health, and we've considered how best that can be assessed and mitigated. There is an environmental impact. There is a significant 370,000 tonnes of carbon emissions generated as a result of this development, which does need to be considered, but the majority of those by far are the result of the climbing and the cruising and the landing of planes, and that is covered at a national level. We've set out in the report and the presentation the impacts on the countryside and the gap, and how that's considered to be a negligible impact and therefore not unacceptable. And there is no identified harm that sees this application needing to be recommended for refusal on air quality, ecology, drainage hazards or landscape grounds. There is an impact as a result of this development from noise, and the applicant has sought to go beyond what the minimum requirements are to mitigate that. And I think the application has moved on significantly from when it was submitted in 2019 to the noise insulation package and noise action plan that you now have before you. There's no identified harm in terms of transport, trees, land conditions or the heritage area. There would, as a result of this development, be some significant economic benefits, both in terms of air users, but also to the sort of local and regional economy. And that's both in terms of direct and indirect employment. So balancing that all up, officers' view is that the application should be supported, and there are enough benefits to outweigh the residual effects of the harms that have been identified. And therefore the recommendation, Chair, is for the conditions that you've got set out before you, possibly to make some minor tweaks as we continue negotiating with the development to dovetail those in with the Section 106 to allow those tweaks to happen, and also for the completion of the Section 106 agreement. That the final recommendation is that in consultation with the Chair and the Vice Chair of the Eastleigh Local Area Committee, that the decision to approve this scheme be delegated to myself as Head of Housing and Development. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Andy. I think that was a very detailed and comprehensive report. Now, I think this is an ideal opportunity for us now to go to a 15-minute break. For councillors' information, we will now move to the link for speakers in objection. So please, can councillors leave this meeting and join the next link in preparation for when we come back in 15 minutes' time. Thank you very much.